A Russian fuel train near Tokmak in the Zaporizhzhia region is burning. 40 fuel tankers. 40 were incinerated in a single drone strike with smoke visible for 20 kilometers across the occupied steppe, according to reporting from December 2024. The Ukrainian military intelligence's drone units had found the train at an unloading point, identified its cargo, and executed a strike that destroyed fuel valued at approximately $4 million according to RBC Ukraine sourcing. And that was just one strike in one location on one night. A strike on a fuel train at Dovzhansk in occupied Luhansk Oblast on November 3, 2025 was documented on video. A Ukrainian Special Operations Forces FP-2 drone striking fuel tanker cars at an unloading point 140 kilometers behind the Russian front line, with the warehouse complex alongside it also struck in the same operation. What you are watching is not an isolated series of railway strikes. You are watching the systematic dismantlement of Russia's rail-borne fuel logistics, the arterial system through which armored and mechanized forces at scale receive the diesel and petrol that makes their military activity physically possible. This is not a story about fuel trains. It is a story about the collapse of Russia's assumption that logistics infrastructure located behind the front line at operational depth could function as a stable and reliable supply mechanism, immune from the kind of persistent attrition that has historically only been possible through air superiority or long-range artillery, neither of which Ukraine had in 2022, and both of which are no longer the necessary prerequisites for operational logistics interdiction in the drone age. Understand what the Russian rail logistics system was supposed to provide and why the military depends on it in ways that truck transport cannot replicate. A single fuel train consists of between 40 and 60 tanker cars, each carrying 50 to 60 tons of fuel. A single strike on a 40-tanker train at an unloading point eliminates between 2 and 3,000 tons of fuel in one event. Fuel that would have taken dozens of truck convoys to deliver, and that was being staged for forward distribution to armor units, artillery batteries, and mechanized forces across the southern sector. Rail logistics enable Russia to move volumes of fuel and ammunition that road transport cannot match at equivalent cost and manpower. The railway system was therefore not merely a convenience. It was the backbone of high-volume military supply at the operational and strategic level. Russia knew this, which is why Russian military logisticians, through most of 2022 and 2023, moved high-value fuel and ammunition cargo by rail rather than road wherever rail infrastructure existed in occupied territory, treating the rail network as a protected and reliable logistics artery. That assumption rested on a straightforward calculation about Ukrainian strike range. Ukrainian artillery and rocket systems could reach rail lines near the contact zone, but not deep logistics nodes, fuel staging areas, and train unloading facilities at 100 to 140 kilometers behind the front. Pull the lens back to understand when and how that calculation failed. Ukraine's development of long-range drone capabilities through 2024 and into 2025 progressively extended the operational depth at which its strike forces could effectively engage Russian logistics infrastructure. The critical threshold was the ability to strike not just rail lines, which can be repaired in hours, but rail infrastructure at staging points and unloading facilities, where fuel and ammunition are transferred from train to truck for forward distribution. Striking a rail line interrupts traffic temporarily. Striking an unloading facility destroys the cargo in transit and potentially destroys the infrastructure required for subsequent deliveries, creating disruptions that last days or weeks rather than hours. The Dovzhansk strike in November 2025 demonstrated this at 140 kilometers behind the front line. The Tokmak strike in late 2024 demonstrated it at similar depth in the Zaporizhzhia direction. The Guardian's September 2025 reporting on railway disruptions confirmed that the campaign had expanded to include deep strikes on rail junctions inside Russia itself, specifically the derailment of a freight train carrying 15 fuel tankers between Stroganovo and Mishinskaya, and the Kamenolomny junction strike in Rostov Oblast on July 19 to 21, 2025. Here is the hidden military variable that changes the entire strategic analysis. The combination of deep rail strikes at logistics staging nodes with the subsequent highway interdiction campaign that began in April 2026 created a logistics collapse scenario that Russia's supply system was not designed to survive. Rail and road transport are not fully independent alternatives. They are complementary modes in an integrated logistics architecture. Rail moves bulk volume over long distances efficiently. Road distributes from rail staging points to forward positions. When Ukraine began simultaneously destroying rail staging nodes through drone strikes and road convoys through the highway interdiction campaign, Russia lost both arms of its integrated supply system at the same time. What happens next changes everything when you examine what the intersection of these two interdiction campaigns produced in the occupied territories. By mid-2026, Russian soldiers on the southern front were posting videos and messages documenting fuel rationing, ammunition shortages, and delayed resupply cycles. The Kyiv Post documented in July 2026 that Russia's crude processing rate had fallen to 3.91 million barrels per day, more than 1.4 million barrels below the previous year's level. Petrol production had fallen by approximately one-third. Frontline commanders were managing fuel allocations at the tactical level in ways that constrained operational mobility, constraining the ability to conduct flanking maneuvers, to reposition artillery, to execute the kind of mechanized combined arms operations that theoretically define Russian military doctrine. Let me walk you through what this actually means at the strategic level. The Russian military operates on a doctrine of material superiority, the assumption that overwhelming firepower and continuous logistics enable it to sustain offensive operations regardless of individual battlefield setbacks. That doctrine is only valid when logistics function. When fuel trains are burning at unloading points 140 kilometers behind the front, when junction nodes are being disabled by drone strikes inside Russia itself, when highway convoys are being destroyed faster than they can be replaced, the material superiority doctrine becomes a theory without a practical execution pathway. The Institute for the Study of War reported through mid-2026 that Russian advances on multiple fronts had fallen to an average of approximately 50 meters per day, a figure that reflected not just tactical resistance but operational deceleration driven by logistics constraint. 50 meters per day is not an army pressing forward with material confidence. It is an army managing scarcity. The broader lesson here is one about the evolution of logistics warfare in the drone age. Traditional military thinking about logistics interdiction assumed it required either air superiority, the ability to strike rail and road systems freely with aircraft, or long-range artillery that could reach operational depth targets. Ukraine achieved functional logistics interdiction against a nuclear-armed state without air superiority and with only selective use of long-range systems by building a drone capability that could be produced at scale, deployed at low cost per unit, and operated with sufficient precision to hit high-value point targets at operational depth. The 40 burning tankers near Tokmak did not end the war on the night they burned, but they were part of a cumulative logic that is ending Russia's ability to generate the operational output its command demands of the forces deployed across occupied Ukraine. Every train that burns is fuel that does not reach the tanks that need it. Every fuel shortage at the front is a constraint on the offensive operation that cannot be executed, and every constraint compounds because a military force that cannot move aggressively cannot hold tactically either hard because tactical resilience also requires mobility. The supply train was the one asset keeping Putin's front line functionally armed. Ukraine has turned it into a target, and it is burning now, visible for 20 kilometers, as testimony to the fact that there is no logistics sanctuary in this war anymore. Stay with us because the consequences of systematic logistics attrition on a military operating at the scale Russia has deployed are only beginning to fully register.